On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Allison DiDominick. She is a senior technical recruiting manager at Flexport. We're going to be talking about adopting AI tools. We're going to go through a use case and what problem Allison and her team were looking to solve, how they went through evaluation of the product, selecting a product and rolling it out and getting it adopted. And we'll see if we can squeeze in a few more things as to what has happened, if she's seen some benefits in terms of the product they've decided on. Allison, thanks for joining the show.
Yes, so happy to be here. Thank you, Amir.
Absolutely. Before we start, can you tell everyone what Flexport does?
Yes. So Flexport is a technology-enabled freight forwarder. That means that we focus on making global shipping as seamless as possible, really thinking of even how your shoes or really anything that is in front of you, how does it actually get to your door? Usually point of origin in China all the way down to point of destination in Los Angeles or any port here in the US. So we make it simple, we bring visibility, automation, enhanced analytics to a very complicated process.
Awesome. All right. So this topic is around adopting an AI tool, and we'll talk about the tool and kind of what you selected. But before that, let's talk about what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and we'll kind of go down that path. So tell us what was the use case? What was the problem that you identified?
So at Flexport, we had seen differences in our hiring teams being able to successfully complete their scorecards of assessments on candidates in a timely fashion or at all. So as everyone knows, we want to make very effective hiring decisions based on assessments of the candidate's talents. And our tech teams had rallied around successfully completing their scorecards in a timely fashion, but many of our non-tech teams struggled to complete their scorecards, complete them with thorough details of the candidate's performance. Often there were thumbs up, let's hire, great fit, no details. So either incomplete scorecards that lacked, detail and analysis, and or often seeing, a delay in the submission of a scorecard, which would actually delay the hiring process, potentially several days to a week. So that was the problem that we were trying to solve. We're also looking for just enhanced efficiency as well. How could we standardize structured interviews? How could we remove bias from the interview process? How could we enable our hiring managers and hiring team to really have evidence-based decisions that were accurately represented again in the scorecards, following through to the hiring decision, whether that was a yes to hire or no, no hire. So those are some of the problems we were trying to solve.
Interesting. So I guess as you'd identified the problem, before we get to the tool, did you go back to the problem statement and look at the process itself, the workflow, getting better adherence, adoption? I mean, was there any other things that could have been done before you bring in a tool? Because I know bringing a tool is its own project, so that's not necessarily easy. But to what extent had you tried just making the current process work?
Yes, absolutely. So we went back to the basics, right? In our intake for roles, really standardizing our interview playbooks, coming up with and pressing and holding the hiring managers accountable for the competencies assessed in each interview stage, building out structured questions to assess those competencies, example, SQL or programming skill like Python or, simply, sales presentation, right? So we got better at creating structured interviews, which then set us up for more success in getting, ideally, hiring managers and interviewers to write more detailed analysis of those competencies. So that was, of course, half the battle.
Interesting. I guess as you started, looking at solutions, I mean, it sounds like an external tool was what you went with originally. Take us back to the evaluation process. Obviously, Did you just look at one tool? Did you look at a set of different tools? What did that process look like?
So initially, it was made a bit simple for us because we do use Greenhouse as our
Hmm.
applicant tracking system, and they were offering a free pilot with BrightHire, an interview intelligence platform. So really able to sort of seamlessly integrate into a tool that we already used quite heavily day to day. In the evaluation of the tool, I did in fact get our security team to, of course, review compliance and ensure that we weren't releasing any data that would be inappropriate. We also made sure and wanted to consider that the tool had global usage. So not just for, US centric teams, but also for EMEA and APAC. And, BrightHire was a tool that allowed us to do so. At the same time, we were starting to experiment with this pilot, other AI agents or co-pilots were sort of coming to fruition. They're coming to fruition probably every day, every hour now. And so since then, right, we've also seen, for example, Gemini release a similar tool to capture and transcribe interview feedback. The gap that we're seeing so far with that is that it's not integrated into our ATS, so there's a matter of copying and pasting, but still something to explore, especially as Gemini is integrating holistically with Flexport's systems already. So again, an opportunity there.
Hmm. Interesting. I love it. I like the fact that obviously the integration into Greenhouse, made that decision, reduces the friction actually, because it sometimes is the better solution all in one system. As you're kind of looking at the product, it obviously is included in Greenhouse. Seems like right decision. When you guys were deciding to go with it, did you have any expectations of, hey, we need to have success criteria? Was it a case of we don't know what we don't know? It's a new tool. We haven't really had this type of tool, so we're going to go with it to see how things are progressing. How would you ascertain the success of the tool when you were making the decision?
So we wanted to make sure that in the initial pilot, the licensed users, we had 8, consisted of not only recruiting team members, both in the US and Europe, but also hiring managers. And so I specifically set up a rotation where I would introduce a hiring manager from a specific business domain, engineering, sales, solutions engineering, just to name a few. And we would actually pilot the program with them for about 3 to 4 weeks so they could really get into the tool and decide whether or not it was effective for them. I didn't want to just have recruiting be sort of an advocate, although I assume that we would be based on time savings in writing our own scorecards and assessments. But I really wanted to make sure it was adding value from hopefully different hiring managers' perspectives. And then also introducing it into debriefs to again bring more evidence-based decisions into the forefront there.
I guess when you're looking at, and you mentioned obviously, I mean, you guys are a global footprint, so you do hiring other places. When you were thinking about geographic differences, in terms of adoption, what were some of the factors that you might have been concerned with when you were, first selecting BrightHire?
Yes. So in speaking with my team in EMEA, we definitely had to consider GDPR requirements. So while they were initially excited about the tool, we had to go back and forth and definitely look at compliance documentation to make sure that BrightHire was in fact following all of the stricter regulation in Europe, which it did in fact prove to be to adhere to. So with that, then in the differences in, I would say more related to cultural between the US and EMEA, we did notice as we piloted BrightHire among my recruiting team members that technical candidates were much more wary of being recorded and were often actually asking to opt out, which of course we allowed, of the interview intelligence platform and BrightHire usage. Non-technical candidates didn't seem to have, any problem or any worries in being recorded, whether video or phone. So there was an interesting dynamic there that was very, very apparent in Europe. In the US, I noticed it a little bit within the technical candidates that I interviewed, but I would say it was a much more stark difference in EMEA.
Interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that because obviously I would have thought just tech in general, but obviously you noticed a difference between the US and the EU or EMEA just having some of those issues. When it did come to actually telling people that they're going to be recorded, just to maybe understand that, um, how was that? How was that phrased? Was it just via email? Was it something discussed? Did it pop up on a screen for the tool? How does that actually work?
Yeah, absolutely. So when the interview is booked with BrightHire, there is an email sent out in confirmation and acknowledging that, in fact, the interview will be recorded using the interview intelligence platform. There's also a link to say, I opt out, not for me. This is an option. When you're using BrightHire and it's joining your video interviews, so again, it works either integrating into your cell phone and recording that way or via Google Meets. Again, you can select BrightHire tool to join the interview, or again, you could opt out. So it shows up saying BrightHire has joined the interview. It's a participant in the call, but obviously it's a note taker. So yeah, pretty easy, pretty seamless, nothing jarring or nothing major there.
Okay, awesome. Um, when you started looking at adoption, and obviously people have to incorporate a tool within the process, they have to use the data. What did you start seeing around adoption and just, well, actually, let's start there, around adoption.
So the recruiters were quick to adopt. It's pretty seamless with a Chrome extension and already integrated into our ATS. So we found that the recruiters were really excited, especially based on the concise notes that the tool would surface, importing those notes seamlessly into your greenhouse scorecards, and then simply reviewing the notes, ensuring that they did in fact reflect your conversation and were accurate, and really making an assessment on that candidate's skill set. We found that probably decreased the administrative burden of time to submit a scorecard or time to write and reflect on a scorecard from probably 20 minutes down to 5 minutes. So that was a really big time saver. Many of the recruiters on my team also felt that, the transcription was very articulate, also very concise in summarizing the candidate's words. They also felt that in certain places where a candidate may not have been a native English speaker or may have had a heavier accent, the transcription actually really brought clarity into understanding the candidate's, true answer to the question and helped resolve, any inconsistencies there. So they were very big fans, sort of racing to say, how long can I keep my BrightHire seat? Hiring managers on the opposite side were, I think, wanting to use the tool, but maybe a bit slower to adopt. So really trying to get them to engage in having an account manager session with our account executive at BrightHire, teaching them sort of what the tool was about. That was be about 15, 20 minutes. And then getting them to enable the Chrome extension. Once they were plugged in and they saw how simple it was for BrightHire to simply join the interview and saw the notes and the transcription that it provided, especially with the time savings in the greenhouse scorecards, then they were usually, pretty happy with the findings. I can talk about a more challenging situation if you'd like as well.
I'm down. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So most of the hiring managers that were advocates were probably generally in the technical domains, right? So hiring managers of engineering teams or data science teams. So I did have a hiring manager that was a bit more skeptical of the process, coming from a marketing, a leadership role in marketing. And essentially, her concern was not wanting to lose the assessment skill of the candidate. That, she was afraid that BrightHire's transcription of the notes would take away her own reasoning process as she wrote up her notes and consolidated them to help perform like a full-fledged evaluation of the candidate.
Hmm.
So part of her process and evaluation was writing, right, and reviewing the content of the interview. And so we discussed more of the supplemental ways that the tool could add but not replace her feedback. So she could completely write up her interview notes, compare them to the transcription from BrightHire, and then see if there was anything lost in translation. And with that, as it was meant to be more supplemental than replacing, I think she found a balance of comfort in, again, knowing that like her own thought process would not be replaced. But it was interesting feedback, and I think important feedback to note.
Hmm. Interesting as you're speaking about this tool, and I think people have tried to do this via, like a Zoom type platform, and obviously there's some issues with that. But I think as it's integrated into the ATS and everyone, has the opportunity to look at this, are you seeing differences in how the interview process could be more objective? And the reason I'm asking is typically, whoever's in the interview room is privy to the conversation. Once you leave, it's all a debrief, it's secondhand conversation, it's a lot of discussion, it's what somebody took away from it, their impressions, there's some objectivity. In this case, there could be a transcript. You can read through it. You can watch the video. I mean, whatever you want, it's there. I guess it's a two-part question, maybe. One, are you seeing objectivity? And two, are people, well, maybe the second part of the question needs to be answered first. Are people going back and looking at those historical data points as somebody progresses and there's some questions, maybe around the fence, those type of scenarios?
I would say, yes, you're seeing objectivity. So I'll give you the example in that BrightHire joins my debriefs, which are, again, a roundtable discussion of the entire interview panel's feedback. Now, with that, you can imagine you would get some signals for hire, some signals for no hire, again, depending on the candidate. So there's an ability in the debrief for interviewers to go back and say, oh, for example, I noticed that they didn't hit X in this deep dive into their SQL skills. Can you show me exactly where in the interview you covered this? Because I'm not seeing it in your notes. And so technically you have the ability to surface the BrightHire video and go back to the exact point of the question and or the written transcript. And therefore, that could lead to a much more confident decision from the entire interview panel because you have vetted the skill gap in question. And again, you've either vetted it for or against, but you're making a more confident decision because you have true evidence base. It's not secondhand knowledge. I have not yet truly witnessed a very deep dive here, but again, we're only using 3 hiring managers, 5 recruiters in the pilot. I expect, especially knowing how contentious some interview panels can get based on different feedback, that this would be a great way to feel much more confident in your assessment. And what I would hope would eventually lead to a higher quality of hire down the line, right? So if you have more confidence in your decision that you made the right choice of candidate and have evidence-based, right, reasoning to support that, hopefully you're not making mishires. Hopefully, again, the quality of hire for your candidate over time continues to increase. But we haven't gotten there in measuring that yet.
Interesting. I mean, that's I think there's so much there, and before this data wasn't being captured, and there you can't do anything. That's impossibility, and you even had challenges uh, with the process. So that's why this tool came in. So it's very interesting to kind of hear with the data. It's obviously a pilot. You guys can expand it, but just the possibilities alone with where AI could potentially fit in that tool. I was going to ask you a question around AI and your team and time. So I think a lot of times I'm speaking to people around AI, and the notion in the public is we're just going to get everyone will lose their job. No one will have a job. AI will do everything. Okay, well, maybe that scenario unfolds down the road. But right now, the human in the loop is what we're looking at, this kind of tool. With the extra time your team might be generating, where can they apply that time? Where are you seeing them apply that time versus some of this busy work that was just overhead before?
Yeah, I mean, the efficiency gains in just the recruiting team are probably 1 to 5 hours a week based on the amount of interviews you conduct, the amount of scorecards you have to write up or would have had to write up in the past. So you could use that time to do more specific sourcing for those niche roles. You could, use that time to be more strategic and work on project management. You could use that time to actually do more live interviews. So the whole idea is that it's an efficiency gain. You can obviously apply that to, interviewers who are saving time by, again, right, completing their write-ups using BrightHire, right, helping to reduce that time to submit a scorecard. They have more time to code, right, to brainstorm, to innovate, whatever the case may be. Um, but it's meant to be supplemental, and then I think it's really up to the recruiter and their leaders to identify where is that time, right, best used.
Absolutely. Final question, maybe for you. As it's rolling out, where do you anticipate the tool going? Is there going to be more adoption? Not that we're going to commit you to that you're going to go for more licenses, but just kind of curious, where does the project, or where does the process go from here?
Yeah, so I think we have to do some evaluation against free, similar tools
Hmm.
that would embed right directly as a, transcription service, but not necessarily integrate into the ATS. And we have to do an analysis of whether or not it's providing the same type of quality feedback that BrightHire is doing, and or whether or not, again, candidates feel comfortable, having their interviews recorded or transcribed. So I think that's an option. I think if we were to dive fully into the platform, there are more insights that come out of the full usage. So, even tracking longest monologue, start times, whether or not the interview panel, was had any, diversity among its ranks, whether or not someone asked an illegal question, which actually BrightHire could track. So there are, advanced analytic functions within BrightHire as well that could, again, prove to be pretty powerful. Right now, I think, again, as we consider ourselves a lean team, we have to look for, what's the best solution? Is it paid? Is it free? What's the type of quality we get? But again, the efficiency gains that I've seen have so far proved to be pretty valuable, and hiring managers generally have had a positive response.
Fantastic. Allison, I love it. The insights. I appreciate you coming on, sharing the process of what you guys have been doing with the tool, and the change in the processes has been really interesting to hear about. If somebody wants to reach out to you to potentially follow up or ask you something about what you guys have done with the tool, or just the process you went through, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is the best option, sending me a direct message that way. And then be happy to follow up through email, set up a call if necessary. But happy to brainstorm, share insights. So feel free to reach out.
Okay, awesome. I definitely appreciate it. And that's the end of the episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think talking about adopting any tool is hard. You got to go through change management process, get adoption, make sure everyone's using the tool correctly, and then evaluate it. I think when you're introducing an AI tool, it has slightly different complexities because it's probably a new project for a lot of teams, and you have to go through understanding what the ramifications are. In this case, we also have to deal with a U.S. versus Europe rollout and some of the nuances with data, demographics, and a lot of different things in there that Allison shared. Please share this episode with others that could benefit from it. It was fantastic. Also, like, subscribe, comment, let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.